I was there when brother turned against brother, when the Emperor's finest sons chose darkness over light. For years I documented their transformation, noble warriors becoming monsters, all while being told to record it as progress. The Horus heresy wasn't just the death of warriors. It was the death of truth itself. I remember the stars being brighter then. Before the darkness fell across the galaxy like a shroud of mourning, before brother turned against brother and the dream of unity shattered into a million bleeding shards, I was there. I saw it all through the lens of my picked recorder and the pages of my journal. This is my testament, my confession, the truth that survived when empires did not. My name is Race Dawn, once a remembrancer in the service of the Great Crusade. I was assigned to the glorious 16th Legion, the Luna Wolves, pride of the Emperor's vision and spearhead of mankind's reclamation of the stars. How proud I was to receive that commission. How naive, how blind. They told us we were documenting the dawn of a golden age, a renaissance of human achievement and unity spanning the vastness of space. They never warned us we would instead record its death rattle. Perhaps they did not know. Perhaps they did, and the lies began even then. I remember the day I first boarded the Vengeful Spirit, the mighty flagship of Horus Lupal, the War Master himself. The gleaming corridors seemed to stretch forever, every surface polished to mirror brightness. Armored giants walked those hallways, their white armor bearing the sigil of the Eye of Terror. They strode with such purpose, such certainty. Artists, the Emperor's finest. Weapons made flesh, but still men, still brothers, still sons. The remembrance of Corps was not welcomed at first. Warriors have little use for scribes and artists on the battlefield. But the Emperor had decreed it, and his word was law even to his sons, even to Horus. We were to record the triumphs of the Great Crusade for posterity, so that future generations would know the glory of this moment in history. The irony cuts deeper than any blade. In the end, we recorded something very different. My first glimpse of Horus Lupal remains burned into my memory like a brand. He stood on the command deck, a towering presence that dominated the space around him not merely through physical stature, but through sheer charismatic gravity. Everything and everyone seemed to orbit him. Even his brother Primarchs deferred to his judgment, his vision. I understood then why the Emperor had chosen him as War Master. Horus noticed me staring, which mortified me at the time. He smiled, actually smiled at a mere remembrancer. That was his gift. He could make anyone feel valued, from the lowest ship rating to a brother Primarch. His voice was like the rumble of distant thunder when he spoke. So you are one of those who will tell our story to the future, he said, a weighty responsibility. Make sure you record it true. Record it true. Those words would come to haunt me in the years that followed. What is truth when reality itself seems to bend and distort? When loyalties shift like sand beneath your feet? When gods walk among men and whisper poison in their ears? In those early days I witnessed glorious conquest, compliance brought to world after world. Some through diplomacy, others through the unleashed fury of the Legion Astartes. I documented it all faithfully. This grand unification of humanity. I believed in it wholeheartedly. The imperial truth. The promise of a galaxy united under the light of reason and human supremacy. But even then there were shadows growing at the edges of our vision. Rumors from distant expeditionary fleets. Whispers of strange phenomena defying rational explanation. The Emperor had returned to Terror, leaving Horus to prosecute the Great Crusade in his stead. I documented the subtle changes this wrought in the Legion's character in the War Master himself. I remember the first time I sensed something was truly wrong. It was after Davenin. Horus had been wounded on that cursed moon, a seemingly minor injury that nevertheless laid him low with fever. For days he lingered near death while the Legion held its collective breath. When he emerged from his healing slumber, something had changed. Something fundamental. I was not privy to the inner circle. Of course, a mere remembrancer sees only what he is permitted to see, records only what he is allowed to record. But I had developed an eye for detail, for the nuances of expression and gesture that betray the thoughts beneath. And I saw darkness growing in Horus like a cancer spreading through healthy tissue. His speeches became different, not in content precisely, but in tone. He spoke more often of the Emperor's absence, of sacrifice unrecognized, of a future that should belong to those who fought for it, not those who remained on Terror, dictating from afar. Small seeds of discontent planted with surgical precision, and they took root in fertile soil. I began to notice divisions forming within the Legion. Those who questioned the increasingly erratic decisions of the War Arm Master were marginalized, transferred to distant companies or assignments. Those who embraced his new vision were elevated, And always, there were the whispers, the closed council meetings from which even senior officers emerged, looking troubled. The visitors to the War Master's chambers that none seemed to recognize. I documented it all, though increasingly my official records diverged from my private journals. One for the iterators and propagandists who traveled with the fleet, spinning glorious tales of conquest and unity. The other for myself, a record of my growing unease, my private heresy of doubt. Then came Istvan III, the atrocity that could no longer be hidden behind veils of propaganda and misdirection. The moment when the cancer of betrayal finally broke the skin and revealed itself to the galaxy. I was not on the surface when it happened. Few remembrances were permitted to accompany the assault forces, and none of those who did survived. But I witnessed the aftermath. The orbital bombardment of the loyalist forces who had been deployed to the surface. Battle brothers killing battle brothers. A slaughter that made no sense, that violated every principle of the Great Crusade I had documented for years. Chaos erupted aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Those who had not been privy to Horus's plans were confronted with the reality of his betrayal. Some joined him willingly. Others resisted and were cut down where they stood. Blood ran in the corridors I had once admired for their gleaming perfection. The ship itself seemed to change, as though the physical environment reflected the corruption that had taken hold in the heart of the Legion. I survived by becoming invisible. It is remarkable how little notice is paid to a remembrancer when the universe is tearing itself apart. I moved through the ship like a ghost, documenting atrocities that no one should ever have to witness. The ship's human crew forced to kneel before new twisted icons, Astartes performing rites that defiled their once sacred oaths. The slow, horrifying transformation of the lunar wolves into something else entirely. The sons of Horus, the breakers of oaths. I hid my journals in maintenance shafts inside hollow wall panels, anywhere I could think of that might be overlooked. My official picked recordings became what was demanded of me. Propaganda for the War Master's new cause. Lies dressed in the trappings of truth. For to refuse was to die, and I had appointed myself witness to this nightmare. Someone had to survive to tell the truth. Record it true, as Horus himself had once charged me. In the solar weeks that followed, I saw the full horror of the betrayal unfold. The drop site massacre on Istvi Vanv, where 3 more legions revealed their true allegiance and nearly destroyed the loyalist response. I was there in the stratosphere, watching through the augur arrays as the Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion, and Word-Bearers sprung their trap. Thousands of Arties died that day. The Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands were all but wiped out. I remember the celebration that followed, a feast held in the great chamber of the Vengeful Spirit, with Horus himself presiding. He no longer bothered to maintain the facade of the stern but fair War Master Astor I had first met. Now his eyes gleamed with a terrible new purpose, and his speech was laced with references to powers and principles that made my skin crawl. "Brothers," he said, raising a chalice that seemed to pulse with an inner light of its own. "Today we have struck a blow from which the Emperor cannot recover. 3 legions crippled, 4 now openly standing with us, and more will follow. The scales have fallen from our eyes. We see the lie at the heart of the Great Crusade. The Emperor does not seek to elevate humanity. He seeks to elevate himself to godhood while denying us the same ascension." The assembled officers roared their approval. I recorded it all, my hands steady even as my heart raced with terror. I had seen the change that had come over these warriors, the subtle alterations to their armor, the strange sigils appearing where once the proud icon of the eye had been. Some had changed physically as well, their features becoming cruer, harder, less human. "The warp offers us truths the Emperor would deny," Horus continued. "Power he would keep for himself alone. We have been tools, my brothers, instruments of conquest wielded by a tyrant, who fears what we might become if we were truly free. But no more. Now we forge our own destiny. Now we claim what has always been rightfully ours. More approval. More raised voices pledging eternal loyalty to the War Master, to his vision." I kept recording, wondering if anyone noticed the remembrancer in the corner, wondering if today would be the day someone decided I had seen too much, heard too much. That night, returning to my small quarters, I was confronted by Malagurs, the War Arm Master's equinely veiled malice. "The War Arm Master wishes to know what you make of recent events, Remembrancer," he said. His voice was soft, which made it all the more terrifying. "I am honored by his interest," I replied carefully. "I record what I observe, as is my duty." "Indeed, and what have you observed?" "A test, a deadly one." In that moment I knew my survival depended on my answer. The truth would get me killed, but too obvious a lie would be equally fatal. I have observed the War Arm Master's courage in challenging a flawed system, I said, choosing each word with painful deliberation. The Emperor's absence has created a void. The War Master seeks to fill it with a new vision. History is shaped by such moments of transformation. Malog studied me for what felt like an eternity. Then he nodded once. The War Arm Master values those who can see clearly. Continue your work. Document this transformation. Future generations should know the truth of what transpires here. The truth. Again, that word twisted and bent until it lost all meaning, but I nodded and bowed my head, grateful for the momentary reprieve while knowing it was merely that. A reprieve, not a pardon. In the solar days that followed, I was given unprecedented access to the command levels of the ship. I was meant to record the planning of the drive on terror, the marshalling of forces that would eventually become the greatest betrayal in human history. But what I witnessed was something far more disturbing. The corruption of Horus was not merely philosophical or political. It was physical, spiritual, fundamental. I glimpsed him once when he thought himself unobserved. His magnificent armor removed, his flesh was changing, patterns of light moving beneath the skin like serpents. His eyes glowed with an inner fire that was not human, had never been human. Whatever bargain he had made on Davin, whatever powers he had embraced, they were remaking him from the inside out. And he was not alone. The officers closest to him were changing as well. Abdon, Aximand, Kaber, all of them touched by the same transformative force. They conducted rites in chambers that had been sealed off from the rest of the crew. Ceremonies that made the air itself feel wrong, unclean. I recorded what I could, though increasingly I was careful to ensure my official picked captures showed only what they wished shown. The glorious revolution against a distant, uncaring emperor. The liberation of humanity from the shackles of the imperial truth. My private journals told another story entirely. The slow descent of noble warriors into something monstrous. The corruption of the Great Crusade's highest ideals. The death of the dream of unity. We received word that other Primarchs had declared for Horus. Angron of the World Etators, always the most volatile of the Emperor's sons. Mortarion of the Death Guard, bitter and resentful of the Emperor's psychic powers. Fulgrim of the Emperor's children, once the most perfect exemplar of the Estart's ideal, now something twisted and hedonistic. Magnus of the Thousand Suns, desperate after the destruction of his homeworld of Prospero. The fleet grew as more ships, more legions, more forces joined the War Arm Master's cause. We were now the traitors in open rebellion, though none aboard the vengeful spirit would have accepted that terminology. In their minds, they were the true loyalists, faithful to the original vision of the Great Crusade that the Emperor himself had allegedly abandoned. I found myself assigned to document a conclave of Primarchs aboard the flagship. Horus, Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion all gathered to coordinate the push toward terror. I had seen Primarchs before, of course, but never had I felt such terror in their presence as I did that day. They had been transformed, each in their own way, by the powers they now openly served. Angron was a creature of barely contained rage. His flesh fused with archotech that pumped combat stimulants directly into his bloodstream. The Butcher's Nails, they were called, and they had driven him to the edge of sanity even before the rebellion. Now he seemed to have embraced madness entirely, glorying in it. Mortarion exuded an aura of decay, of entropy. His once stern features had taken on a cadaverous aspect, and he carried with him the stench of chemical warfare and death. His warriors, the Death Guard, were changing as well, their resilience turning to a kind of living rot that neither killed them nor allowed them the mercy of true health. But it was Fulgrim who disturbed me the most. The Phoenician, once the most beautiful of the Emperor's sons, moved with a sinuous grace that was both alluring and repulsive. His armor had been modified to display rather than conceal, adorned with symbols and icons that hurt the eye to look upon directly. His legion, the Emperor's children, had embraced a pursuit of sensation and experience that had led them into the darkest excesses imaginable. And presiding over them all was Horus, changed yet still recognizably the great War Master Esther. His charisma remained, but now it was edged with something predatory, something hungry. He spoke and they listened. These demigods, who had once been the pinnacle of human potential, now they plotted the ruination of everything humanity had built. I recorded the conclave as ordered, focusing my picked captures on the strategic displays, the fleet deployments, the planned offensives, but my personal journal, scratched hastily in the privacy of a maintenance closet afterward, recorded my observations of what these beings were becoming, not transhuman any longer, but something other. Something that had transcended or perhaps descended beyond humanity entirely. The rebellion gathered momentum. The Imperium, caught unprepared by the scale and coordination of the treachery, reeled from blow after blow. News reached us of atrocities committed in the War Master's name. Worlds put to the torch. Populations enslaved or sacrificed to the new gods openly worshipped by many among the traitor forces. The Death Guard unleashed plagues that transformed entire planets into breeding grounds for disease. The World Eaters slaughtered indiscriminately, their bloodlust unquenchable. The Emperor's children engaged in acts of such depravity that even hardened warriors looked away in disgust. And through it all I continued to record. My official work became increasingly propagandistic, crafting narratives of liberation and revolution for distribution to conquered worlds. But my hidden journals told the true story. The horror of what was being done in the name of freedom from tyranny. The monstrous transformation of the Great Crusade into something that betrayed its every founding principle. I knew that my position grew more precarious with each passing day. Other remembrances had disappeared, victims of the changing character of the fleet. Some had been sacrificed in the new rites practiced by the War Master's inner circle. Others had been converted into servitors, their minds wiped clean and their bodies repurposed to serve in mindless drudgery. A few had willingly embraced the new realities, becoming zealous chroniclers of the ascendant powers of chaos. Those were perhaps the most disturbing of all. It was during the journey to terror that I nearly met my end. I had ventured into a section of the ship I believed deserted, intent on hiding another journal filled with my observations. I turned a corner and came face to face with Fulgrim himself, the Primarch of the Emperor's children. He was alone, which was unusual for a Primarch, especially in these dangerous times of shifting allegiances. But Fulgrim had always been confident to the point of arrogance. He regarded me with eyes that seemed to shift color as I watched, a kaleidoscope of impossible hues. "A remembrance, sir," he said, his voice melodious yet somehow grating like beautiful music played discordantly. "How quaint. I thought Horus had disposed of your kind by now." I bowed deeply, trying to control my trembling. "Lord Primarch, I serve the War Master, documenting his righteous cause." Fulgrim laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Righteousness, such a limited concept. There is no right or wrong, little chronicler, only sensation. Experience the infinite possibilities of existence." He leaned closer and I could smell a cloying perfume emanating from his armor, sweet and rotten simultaneously. "What sensations have you experienced in your small, fragile life? What heights and depths have you plumbed?" I had no answer that would satisfy him, no answer that would not reveal my horror at what he had become. But I was saved from having to respond by the arrival of another figure, Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain of the Sons of Horus. "Lord Fulgrim." Abdon's voice was cold, suspicious. "The War Master requires this remembrancer for a specific task. You will have to find another plaything." Fulgrim smiled, an expression that never reached his shifting eyes. Of course, far be it from me to interfere with my brother's plans. He glided away, his movements too fluid, too perfect to be natural. When he was gone, Abaddon fixed me with a glare of pure contempt. "The War Master protects you for now, Remembrancer. He values the narratives you craft for the masses we bring into compliance. But do not test the limits of his favor." "I live only to serve," I said, the lie acid on my tongue. "See that you remember that," Abdon replied. He gestured for me to precede him down the corridor, back toward the populated sections of the ship, away from my intended hiding place. I had no choice but to comply, the journal burning like a brand where I had concealed it within my robes. That night, I found a new hiding place and reflected on how narrowly I had escaped. Fulgrim would have killed me for amusement, or worse, taken me back to whatever hellish domain his legion had carved out within the fleet. And Abaddon, while he had saved me from that fate, clearly viewed me with suspicion. My time was running out. The journey to terror would not take forever. And once the final battle began, what use would there be for a remembrancer? It was then that I began to formulate a plan, a desperate one with little chance of success. But I had to try. The truth of what had happened, of how the bright promise of the Great Crusade had curdled into this nightmare of betrayal and horror, had to survive. Someone had to know. Someone had to remember. The vengeful spirit was a vast vessel, a city in space with tens of thousands of crew. Most were press-ganged from conquered worlds serving under duress. Others were true believers in the War Master's cause. A small minority were original crew from before the betrayal, kept alive for their specialized knowledge or skills. Among this last group, I had cultivated a few contacts. People who, like me, had seen the transformation of the lunar wolves into the sons of Horus with horror, rather than reverence. One of these was Merrick Callisto, a senior tech adept who maintained the ship's communication arrays. He had once been proud to serve aboard the flagship of the Great Crusade. Now he went through the motions of his duties while secretly loathing what the ship had become. I approached him with my plan. "It is madness," he said when I explained what I intended. "Even if you could get a message out without it being intercepted, who would receive it? Half the galaxy is in flames. The other half will be soon enough." "Not a message." I clarified my journals, all of them. The true account of what has happened here, what I have witnessed. Callisto's augment I-word as he studied me. "And what would that accomplish?" "The truth. The truth is burning along with everything else. The truth matters," I insisted, especially now. Especially when it is being systematically destroyed and replaced with lies. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, a strange sound coming from his half-mechanized lungs. "There is a way." A narrow encoded channel used for routine navigational telemetry. Small data packets only. But if compressed properly, text could be transmitted. "Where would you send it?" I had given this considerable thought. "Terror," I said to the Sigillite. Malkador the Sigillite, the Emperor's most trusted advisor, the regent of terror in the Emperor's absence. If anyone could ensure the truth was preserved, it would be him. Callisto laughed, a harsh bark without humor. "You aim high, Remembrancer, very well. I cannot promise your journals will reach the Sigillite himself, but I can send them toward terror on a channel that might evade detection. After that, fate will decide." It was more than I had hoped. For over the following solar days, I gathered my hidden journals, carefully cataloged and organized them, then delivered them in small batches to Callisto for transmission. Each delivery was fraught with danger. The ship had eyes everywhere now, both human and otherwise. Strange entities stalked the lesser-used corridors. Things that had never been born of woman and never known human thought or feeling. The ship itself was changing, its metal taking on organic qualities in places, its architecture shifting in ways that defied rational explanation. As we drew nearer to the Sol system, the final goal of Horus's rebellion, the atmosphere aboard the vengeful Spirit grew increasingly tense. Warriors who had been brothers now eyed each other with suspicion, wondering about hidden loyalties. The human crew walked in fear, knowing that their lives were worth less than nothing to the transhuman lords they served, and Horus himself became more withdrawn, spending long periods in chambers where none but his closest advisors were permitted to enter. The transmissions were nearly complete when disaster struck. I was delivering the final batch of journals to Callisto when we were intercepted by one of Malagurst's agents, a hulking enforcer whose armor bore the crossed lightning bolts that had become an emblem of the more fanatical elements within the Sons of Horus. "The War Master wishes to speak with you." "Remembrance," he said. There was no emotion in his voice, no hint of what awaited me. Callisto and I exchanged a brief glance. He took the data slate I had been about to hand him and nodded almost imperceptibly. The last of my testimony would be sent. Whatever happened to me now, the truth would survive. I was escorted not to Horus's personal chambers, but to a large strategium where senior officers gathered around holithic displays showing the approaching Sol system. Terror, the cradle of humanity, the final target of the rebellion. Horus stood at the center of it all, his presence even more overwhelming than before. Power radiated from him like heat from a sun, a palpable force that made the air thick and difficult to breathe. He said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a sentence, "My faithful chronicler, you have served me well these past years." I bowed, forcing my face to remain composed. "I live to record the truth of your ascension, Lord War Master." Something like amusement flickered across his features, now barely recognizable as the noble visage I had first encountered years ago. The truth, a malleable concept, is it not? What is true depends entirely on who prevails. History is written by the victorious. As you say, my lord, he gestured to the holithic display. Terror awaits us. The final battle approaches. The Emperor will fall and a new age will begin, one that you will record for future generations. It was not a request. It was not even an order. It was a statement of what would be as immutable as the stars. However, he continued, there is a matter that concerns me. He nodded to someone behind me, and Malagurst stepped forward holding a data slate. My blood ran cold. It seems you have been keeping a separate account, one less flattering to our cause. Malagurst activated the slate, and I heard my own words read back to me. A passage from one of my earliest hidden journals describing the changes I had observed in Horus after Davanan, the beginnings of my doubts. "This is troubling," Horus said, his voice still calm, reasonable. That was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. The monster he had become still wore the mask of the great statesman, the visionary leader. "You have witnessed history in the making, Remembrancer, but you have failed to understand its significance. Failed to appreciate the necessity of what we do." I said nothing. What defense could I offer? The evidence of my treachery was there, incontrovertible. Fortunately, Horus continued, "This provides us with an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate the power of narrative, of how truth can be reshaped to serve a greater purpose." He gestured. And servitors wheeled in a complex apparatus, a mind scrubber used to prepare subjects for conversion to servitor status. But this one had been modified, adapted to a more subtle purpose. "You will not be mind-wiped entirely," Horus explained as though conferring a great mercy. "Your skills as a chronicler are too valuable to waste. Instead, your memories will be selectively altered, your doubts excised, your perspective adjusted, and then you will write the true history of this moment, the triumph of freedom over tyranny, the ascension of humanity to its rightful place among the powers of the cosmos." I could not hide my horror. Then death would have been preferable to having my mind, my very identity rewritten to serve the powers that had corrupted everything I had once believed in. But there was nowhere to run, no appeal to be made. "Consider it an honor," Horus said as the apparatus was prepared. "Few mortals are given the opportunity to witness the birth of gods. Fewer still are permitted to record it for eternity." The technicians approached, their faces hidden behind masks that resembled the distorted visages of screaming souls. I closed my eyes, silently reciting the names of all those I had known who had died, holding to their principles, who had refused to bow before the corruption that had consumed the Great Crusade. If my mind was to be violated, at least my final thoughts would be my own. Then the world exploded into light and sound. An alarm klaxon shattered the moment. Officers rushed to consoles demanding reports. Horus turned away, his attention captured by a sudden crisis that outweighed the fate of one Remembrancer. "Multiple ships translating from warp space," someone reported. "Imperial vessels, a counterattack." Horus's voice cut through the chaos with the precision of a surgeon's blade. "Identification. Dark Angels, my lord. The First Legion. They have somehow circumvented our outer pickets." For the first time, I saw something like concern cross the War Master's face. The Dark Angels had been unaccounted for in the rebellion thus far. Their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, had neither declared for Horus nor openly opposed him until now. "Prepare for naval engagement." Horus ordered all warriors to battle stations. "Malagurst, secure the Remembrancer until we have dealt with this interruption." I was dragged from the strategium, half carried through corridors that shook with sudden impacts as void warfare erupted around the fleet. Malagurst took me not to the detention cells but to his own quarters, more secure and private. "A temporary reprieve," he said, shoving me roughly into a chair. "Make peace with whatever gods you still believe in. When the War Master has dealt with this nuisance, your re-education will proceed." He left me there, locked in but unrestrained. Through a small viewport I could see flashes of weapons fire illuminating the void. A battle was raging, though from my limited perspective I could not tell its scope or who might be prevailing. I thought of my journals transmitted to Terror. Would they ever reach their destination? Would anyone read them and understand what had happened? How the noblest of ambitions had been twisted by pride and resentment into the greatest betrayal in human history. Hours passed. The ship shuddered repeatedly under enemy fire. I heard distant explosions, the sounds of damage being inflicted on the mighty flagship. Reports over the internal Vox system spoke of boarding actions of Dark Angel strike teams, teleporting directly onto the vengeful spirit. A desperate gambit, a suicide mission. Then the door to Malagus's quarters burst inward, torn from its frame by explosive charges. Through the smoke stepped a figure in midnight black armor adorned with hooded robes. A Dark Angel estates, his bolter raised and ready. He surveyed the room quickly, his enhanced senses categorizing and dismissing me as a non-threat. He was about to move on when something made him pause. He looked at me more carefully, noting my Remembrance's robes, the imperial aquilor I still wore despite everything. "You are not one of them," he said, his voice distorted by his helmet's vox grill. No, I replied, finding my voice. I am Remus Deacon, Remembrance Aori, and I can help you. The Dark Angel hesitated only a moment before nodding once. Come with me if you wish to live. The ship is lost. We have what we came for. I did not ask what that meant. I simply followed him through corridors littered with the bodies of both sides. Sons of Horus and Dark Angels locked together in death, having slain each other in the confined spaces of the ship. The sounds of battle still echoed from distant sections, but our path seemed temporarily clear. My unlikely savior led me to a teleportarium hub, where other Dark Angels guarded what appeared to be a prisoner, a massive figure in Terminator armor, his heraldry marking him as one of Horus's inner circle. He was heavily restrained and seemed semi-conscious. Teleport lock established, one of the Dark Angels reported. 30 seconds to extraction. My guide turned to me. Stay close. The teleport field is calibrated precisely. Step outside it and your atoms will be scattered across half the system. I nodded, too numb with shock and the sudden hope of survival to form words. The captured son of Horus groaned, starting to regain awareness of his surroundings. The Dark Angels tightened their grips on their weapons, ready to execute him if necessary, before allowing him to be rescued. The teleportarium hummed with building energy. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the distinctive sound of cataphracti Terminator armor approaching, heavy reinforcements coming to reclaim their captured brother. 10 seconds, the Dark Angel at the controls announced. The door at the far end of the chamber began to glow red as something incredibly hot was applied to its surface from the other side. They were burning through. 5 seconds. The door exploded inward. Fragments of metal sting through the air. 2 Dark Angels fell, their armor punctured in a dozen places. Through the smoke strode a massive figure that could only be Abaddon himself, his Terminator plate scorched and dented from recent combat, but still terrifyingly functional. 3, 2, 1. The world dissolved into coruscating energy. The last thing I saw was Abaddon's face contorted with rage as his prize slipped away. Then reality reassembled itself, and I found myself standing in the teleportarium bay of a different ship entirely. Smaller, less ornate, but clean, uncorrupted. The insignia of the Dark Angels was displayed prominently on every surface. Extraction successful, someone reported. All targets accounted for. I was led from the teleportarium to a holding area where I was separated from the Dark Angels prisoner. They treated me not unkindly, but with obvious suspicion. I was, after all, someone who had been aboard the War Master's flagship. My loyalties would be thoroughly investigated before I was trusted in any capacity. Days passed as the Dark Angels fleet disengaged from the conflict and made a series of short warp jumps to throw off pursuit. I was questioned repeatedly about what I had witnessed, what I knew of Horus's plans. I told them everything, holding nothing back. The corruption, the betrayal, the horror of what the Lunar Wolves had become. Eventually, I was granted an audience with a senior officer, a librarian whose psychic abilities had allowed him to verify the truth of my account. He studied me with eyes that seemed to see beyond physical reality. Your testimony is valuable, he said, but more importantly, we have confirmed that your journals reached Terror. The Sigillite himself has acknowledged their receipt. Relief flooded through me so intense I nearly collapsed. Then it was worth it, I whispered. Someone will know the truth. The librarian's expression was unreadable. Truth is a rare commodity in these dark times, he said. The Imperium's official history may yet record events differently from how you experience them. Politics and necessity often outweigh accuracy. I understood what he was saying. Even if my account survived, it might be suppressed, classified, hidden away from public knowledge. The ugly truths of the heresy might be sanitized for future generations, shaped into simpler narratives of heroes and villains rather than the complex tragedy of ambition and corruption I had witnessed. But someone will know, I insisted. Someone will remember. The librarian nodded. Yes, and perhaps centuries from now, when the wounds of this time have scarred over, the full truth may be revealed. He rose, indicating our meeting was at an end. You will be taken to Terror. Your skills as a remembrance, sir, are still needed. The war is far from over. I never returned to the front lines of the conflict. My role in the years that followed was to document the Imperium's official history of the heresy, a sanitized version that emphasized the Emperor's foresight, the nobility of those who remained loyal, the pure evil of those who turned traitor, the complexities I had witnessed, the slow corruption that had turned heroes into monsters were largely omitted. Simplicity serves power better than nuance ever could, but my original journals remained, preserved in the deepest vaults of the Sigillites' personal archives. The truth. Waiting for a time when humanity could bear to face it. I do not know if that time will ever come. The Imperium that emerged from the ashes of the Heresy had little use for truth. It ran on faith, on obedience, on unquestioning loyalty to an emperor now enshrined as a god, despite his own teachings against such worship. I lived to see the birth of this new Imperium, to see how the dream of secular human rationalism died and was replaced by a religion of sacrifice and martyrdom. I served until my final days as an official remembrancer, recording the approved version of history for future generations. A lie agreed upon as some ancient Terran philosopher once defined history, but I never forgot what I had seen. The slow corruption of noble ideals, the power of resentment and pride to destroy even the greatest of visions, the terrible price of ambition. I'm old now, dying. This final testament will join my original journals in whatever vault or reliquary the Sigillite deemed secure enough. Perhaps they have already been destroyed. Perhaps they will survive for millennia. It matters little to me now. I have discharged my duty as I understood it to record the truth, to bear witness. I remember the stars being brighter then, before darkness fell across the galaxy. I remember the dream of unity, of human rationalism triumphant among the stars. I remember Horus as he was before pride and resentment corrupted him. I remember the Emperor's vision before it drowned in the blood of his sons. I remember. And in remembering, perhaps some small flame of truth survives in this dark age of the 41st millennium, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods.